Having just spoken with Derek Khosrowshahi, which was, of course, the IPO of this year, and I know there's lots of speculation about a public listing next year, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But there is some breaking news that's happening with his company, not planned. You just sent out an email, I believe, to your staff and to the entire Airbnb team. I think it's happening literally as we speak.
Yes.
For those who don't know, there was 5 people were killed last Thursday.
Yeah, Halloween night.
In Northern California at an Airbnb. There was a house party there. I know that you have probably not slept these last 5 days, thinking about how you wanted to change the company fundamentally. And I just got a draft of what is going on here. So why don't you just tell everybody, A, what the past 5 days has been like, and B, what you've decided to do about it.
Yeah, so there was a tragedy on Halloween night. Somebody threw an unauthorized house party. House party got beyond out of hand. That would be an understatement. Somebody brought a gun. There was an altercation. It was a mass shooting, and 5 people were killed. It was a huge tragedy. In the wake of this, let me back up for a second. So Airbnb is founded really on the premise of trust. When we started Airbnb, I remember telling people about the idea, and people said, "You're crazy." And I said, "Why am I crazy?" They said, "Strangers will never trust one another to stay in homes." And over the course of the last 10 years, I think what we created, what we invented, wasn't really a way to book a home. I think what we invented was a way for strangers to trust one another to stay in homes. And for the most part, it's reinforced this basic belief that we've had, maybe naive, that people are fundamentally good. And statistically speaking, it's true. About 2 million people a night stay in Airbnbs, and most without incident. But, very often there are moments in your company's history, and there was a moment in our past that defined us, and this is another one of those moments, where a tragedy happens, and we say enough is enough, we galvanize, and we are making the most significant change to our platform to increase the amount of trust in our platform. And so we're rolling out 4 different things. The first thing we're going to do is have 100% verified. We will make sure that 100% of hosts and 100% of listings will be reviewed by the end of next year, with the intention of having 100% of the things on Airbnb being verified.
When you say verified, you mean verified by the company, not by a star system of users?
It will be essentially a combination of the company and the community. So we're going to use technology, we're going to use guests, we're going to basically get a confidence score, but we're going to make sure that we can stand behind every single listing, every single host, to make sure that every single listing is accurate, the information's accurate, the photos are what you say they are, the addresses are accurate, they meet minimum standards, they meet basic safety protocol, and the host is who they say they are, and you know what that identity is. We think this is a really, really critical step for our industry, because I think ultimately the internet really can only function on a premise of trust. There's an old saying, things move at the speed of trust. Well, how could you possibly trust something on a platform if you don't even know if it's true? And so I think many of us in this industry over the last 10 years are going from a hands-off model where the internet's an immune system to realizing that's not really enough, that we have to take more responsibility for the stuff on our platform. And I think this has been a gradual, maybe too gradual, transition for our industry. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we're launching a guest guarantee. And the guest guarantee basically means that we want to give peace of mind to guests, knowing that if you check into an Airbnb and it's not as described, that we will first try to make sure that we find a new Airbnb of equal or greater value. If we don't have it, we will give you 100% refund guaranteed. The third thing is we're creating a neighbor hotline. This has been a big requested feature. We've had a hotline in the past, but we need to go much further. So we're going to have a 24/7 neighbor hotline where any neighbor in any town in any part of the world, 24/7, can call us. It'll be staffed by real people, not automated, and will be a rapid response team trained by police chiefs to make sure that we can deal in a timely manner with complaints. And the last thing is hopefully something that could have helped, it's hard to prevent every bad thing happening in 2 million homes every night, but we're going to do extra manual reviews of every single high-risk reservation. So for example, if a single person books a 10-room home for that night in the city they live in. That is a very high-risk reservation. Well, that's the most extreme version, but there are less extreme versions. And we have a lot of technology protocols that can elevate things, but I think that ultimately technology has its limits, at least technology today. And so you have to put a lot more humans behind it in the review. I hope that all of this takes what has already been a pretty significant step forward for the company and does what I think is the most significant step forward in the trust design of our platform, probably since we started the company.
Okay, so let me unpack a lot of this, because you just talked about a lot of things here. But what I'm hearing underneath this is, and maybe I'm wrong, there's a bit of a model shift. This may be upending a little bit of the model, because for so very long, your service was based on trust, and the trust that other customers could do the reviewing, could do the verifying that the company could not, right? We just talked to Dara. We all see the stars on the drivers, and that's all, again, about trust. But it's us. It's this crowdsourcing of trust as opposed to a single entity that's actually then verifying what's going on. That's been an asset-light business. It's actually a very good business model, typically.
Yes.
I imagine to do the things you're talking about, to verify every single property, and you say this is going to happen now, literally in the next 12 months.
Well, we'll make sure that every single property is reviewed with the intention that 100% of things on Airbnb are verified, and there will be a day where there hopefully will be nothing that is ever not verified. Now, a nuance I will say is I think we're going to do this in collaboration with the community. 70% of guests who book on Airbnb do leave reviews, but they leave a 5-star review. We actually are going to now start working towards asking them specific questions. Was this address correct? Was this true? Was that true? And then we're going to use that with our team and our technology and try to triangulate information. And this is just a big step forward, a much larger investment for us.
Okay, but let's say I have never put my apartment on Airbnb, at least not yet.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm a first-time customer in this respect, though I've been on the other end of it. How would you verify me on the first time that you're going to be seeing whether my apartment is really my apartment?
So this is something I've literally been holding the company together. I've been on calls day and night, try to get us to design this. So, we're going to be coming back with more details. The team is working on these details now. What will probably happen is in the near term, we're going to demarcate the difference between a listing that is verified and one that we don't know enough information about. And we're going to be very, very explicit that this is a new listing without enough data. Over time, with enough technology, hopefully upon publishing, the vision would be eventually you could verify upon publishing. Now, some of our businesses, like Airbnb Experiences, Airbnb Plus, Airbnb Luxe, we manually review and vet every single thing that is vetted. But this isn't the model that we started with on Airbnb. But I think this is the model that it's going towards. I think ultimately, most of these technology platforms, it's going to have to be a collaboration between the company and the community participating together. But what happened previously is they weren't talking enough. It wasn't active enough incentives with the community, and the companies maybe weren't hands-on enough.
Okay, so what is the cost of all of this going to be? Because having manual human beings ready 24/7 around the world to answer phone calls is expensive. Having individuals verifying all of this is expensive. This is a company, as you've indicated earlier this year, planning some form of a public listing.
Yes.
We can get into that in a minute. But in this conversation we were having with Dara and how investors are looking at growth versus profits, margins, I assume that you've been doing some modeling over the weekend, not just on how to do this, but what it's going to cost to do it.
Yes, I mean, it is a significant investment, but I'll say this. Airbnb, we raised $3.2 billion of capital from investors. We have more money in the bank than we've raised. The time is now to make these investments, and I ultimately think we are investing for the long term. This is inherently a mostly capital-light business, and I think it makes complete sense. And ultimately, we're in the business of trust, so we have to make these investments to protect our users.
Does this change any of your planning in terms of timing
for
this listing for next year?
Absolutely not. And I ultimately think this is the very best possible outcome for our community with the changes we're making. And I think it will actually be a great outcome. I think it will provide a lot more peace of mind.
Speak to this idea of a public listing next year, because you were public. You put out a sentence, a one-sentence release saying that this company intends to be public in 2020.
Yes.
Why? Most companies don't necessarily put the flag in the ground that way.
Well, we were going to be entering a quiet period where we're making a handful of filings, and we wanted to just make clear to our thousands of employees, to our investors and to others, we just wanted to kind of put the rumors to rest about, are we going to go public any month, and just be very, very clear about what our general timeline is. Now, we don't want to pin down an exact month, but we just wanted to lay to rest any questions about something being imminent before the holidays.
What is your take, by the way, on what does seem like a remarkable shift in the way investors are thinking about unicorns like yourself? And the reason I ask is because it used to be growth at all costs.
Right.
Now there seems to be a shift in a meaningful way towards profits. This is a company that has a valuation, I believe, right now of about $31 billion. That's in the private markets. There's a lot of people who don't know whether the private market number is a real number anymore.
Well, I think that historically what happened was investors used to value companies like a 1 or a 0. Either it's a tech company or it's not a tech company. And if it's a tech company, it's either growing fast or not growing fast. If you're growing fast and you're a tech company, you get a huge multiple of revenue. And what we maybe didn't ask ourselves is maybe there's a continuum of tech companies. There's really high margin tech companies that have low marginal costs as they produce more things. And there are companies that use technology, but they have lower marginal costs. And I think what you're seeing is that in this world where software is eating the world, we can't treat all tech companies the same. I think that is the revaluation that investors are doing.
Right. One of the things I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is actually the culture in Silicon Valley, and there's been so much debate around tech companies and social media and how they deal with society. You've been dealing with society and regulators from the very beginning.
From the very beginning.
And in many ways, I think, experienced some of these challenges and some of the critiques and criticism, again, from the very beginning. You mentioned 2011.
Even earlier. So most tech companies did not have any scrutiny. They didn't have to have a policy team until they were big. And the scrutiny occurred because they were large. We started getting scrutiny when we were 10 people working in a 3-bedroom apartment with no staff. In the moment we basically launched, it was in our DNA. In my initial instinct, when people used to fight us or people used to challenge us, was to avoid people who don't like you. That seemed completely reasonable. And I'm like, they don't like me, I'm gonna avoid them. And that was my instinct. And I want to stay out of trouble. I don't want conflict. And then I hired my first executive, a woman named Belinda Johnson. She's now our chief operating officer. And she said, if people don't like you, you should meet them. And I thought, seriously? And she says, yes. I said, but if I meet them, it could end very badly. She said, if you meet them and you listen to them and you educate them about who you are, 99 times out of 100, things will end better than when you enter the meeting. I was very skeptical of this, but we tried it. And we went from a Secretary of War to a Secretary of State approach. And we started meeting people. And I literally at one point said, let's just get me in a room with everyone that hates me. Well, there are a lot of rooms to go to. So that became a very, very long tour. But ultimately, I think people started realizing that we do have the best of intentions, that and the outcome of that became, we ended up creating agreements with 500 different cities where we collaborated with them to update their laws in a way that worked for the city and worked for the company. We started collecting remaining hotel tax. We've collectively collected $1.6 billion of hotel occupancy tax. We'll probably soon be the largest collector of hotel tax in the world. And, this has been a really, really big lesson for us. And I think it's kind of like, your culture is whatever happens in the early days. It gets baked into your DNA. And I think this has been very important for us.
So what happened in 2011?
In 2011 was our first trust crisis. So, when we started Airbnb, people said, this thing will never work. And they were saying, just wait till somebody's home gets trashed and the whole house will come crashing down. And so everyone was just waiting for something to happen on Airbnb. In July 2011, that thing happened. There was a woman named EJ, and she had her apartment trashed. And we were completely ill-prepared. And we bungled the response. We weren't fast enough. And suddenly, there was outrage. I got to experience the whole Twitter mob thing. It's not pleasant. And there was a hashtag on Twitter in the middle of the crisis, and it was hashtag RIP Airbnb. That is how near death it felt at the time. And first I tried to write a public blog post saying, like, we're doing the best we can. It's not really our fault. And it was panned, and then people got even angrier. And it seemed like everything I did, the more angry people got. And probably 5 or 6 days into the crisis, it just wouldn't end. I thought to myself, the hell with it. However happens, I don't even know if there will be an Airbnb at the end of this. So how do I want to be remembered? And I went from what I describe as a business decision to a principle decision. A business decision is you make the best decision hoping for a specific outcome. A principle decision is irrespective of what the outcome is, what do you think the right thing to do is? And I felt like the right thing to do was create an unconditional, open apology to this woman. And then we instituted 3 other things. We created a Airbnb host guarantee, which is like an insurance. We basically offered $50,000 protection to every home. It's now $1 million.
You were going to offer $500.
I was going $5,000, and then Mark Andreessen, one of our investors, came in at midnight, and he took my letter. He says, "This is perfect, but I want to make one change," and he added a 0 at the end. And I thought to myself, wait a second, we're going to completely run out of money. The only thing that gave me courage was he was the one that gave us the money. So I thought, well, if we're out of money, you better write another check. And he said, fine. And so, but that was a bold move. And I think the audacity of doing that in the early days meant that people actually, oddly enough, trusted us more after the crisis than before the crisis. It's also, I believe, the first day I went from being a founder to a CEO. And they're different. You know, you're a founder, you're starting a company with your friends, typically in a garage, an apartment, a little office. One day you have to be a CEO. You have to be decisive. Not everyone's going to agree. You have to have courage. You have to be bold. And, you know, that's a big growing up experience for somebody who starts a company when they're 26.
Do this for me. Evaluate the way you think other CEOs in Silicon Valley are thinking about these issues, given that you've now lived it. I'm curious how you think about big tech and the culture that you've grown up in.
When I came to Silicon Valley 10 years ago, the word technology may as well have been a dictionary definition for the word good. We all believed it. Technology equals good because technology is progress, and every piece of progress is a step forward for humanity. So therefore, if you're in the technology business, you're, quote, making the world a better place. And I think the problem with that culture is it made us not ask really thoughtful questions about, well, what is the impact of our technology on society? We are here living in the 21st century, but the way we run companies seems very rooted in the last century. Like a lot of big companies are still quarter to quarter, and they serve primarily one stakeholder, let's be honest, and that stakeholder are shareholders. Well, I think that what we've seen over the last 5 years are the public screaming, you have more than one stakeholder. You have your customers, you have your employees, but you also have society. And that what if we thought about making products that weren't just good for shareholders, weren't just good for customers, that were healthy for society? And this is something we've had to learn. And what if you measure your impact on society, and those metrics are as important as financial metrics?
So what are those metrics for you?
Well, we identified 5 stakeholders: our guest, our hosts, which are our partners, our employees, our shareholders, and as important as all stakeholders, the communities we operate in. We wrote principles for each, 2 or 3 principles per stakeholder. So, for example, we will treat our hosts as partners, or we'll strengthen the communities we operate in. These would be example principles. And then we create a series of metrics. Metrics could be, what is the host satisfaction? It could be how many friendships are created in reservations, not just how much revenue. It could be what are the carbon offsets of the cumulative travelers on our platform. It could be what impact are we having on local communities. And without having those metrics, you end up with kind of anecdotes. And so you really want to make sure that the data you have is very, very consistent. And then you can start to make trade-offs. I do believe that the majority of people I've met in Silicon Valley want to do the right thing. The problem is they focus so narrowly on just a few metrics that it's very easy to hand-wave things until it's too late. And it's like driving in a car. If you drive 200 miles an hour and you're only looking at the road in front of you, you can run over something and not know because you can't even see it in the rearview mirror.
Okay, a couple quick business questions for you. So there's likely a listing next year. There's a lot of speculation that the company is profitable or cash flow positive. Can you speak to that? And the reason I ask is that there are so many companies that have talked about being cash flow positive, and then the stocks come out, or the S1 comes out, and people go, well, maybe it's not profitable.
Yeah. I can't talk about this year's financial results. We were profitable last year and the year before. I'm allowed to talk about that. And I can say that cumulatively, we have more money in the bank than we've raised. So we've raised $3.2 billion. We have more money in the bank than we've raised. So I hope we are viewed as a maybe, kind of unique story in that way for our
And how do you think between an IPO and a public and a listing, and the reason I'm thinking of this is...
You mean a direct listing?
A direct listing, I'm sorry, because I'm thinking of Spotify and Slack and others who've approached it that way, where they don't need to raise new money.
So I certainly don't have any news to make, except to say that we also don't need to raise new money.
So we'll be seeing a direct listing next year. Couple other quickies, and then I do want to go to the audience. I know there's so many people in the tech world. I saw Steve Case up there at one point, who I want to see if we can get to, and others as well. But here's where I wanted to go. Hotels. It feels like the hotel universe, which was going up against you for so long, is now trying to be you, and you are trying to be in the hotel business itself. You bought a hotel tonight. And by the way, the hotel companies are also going to do experiences. You're doing experiences. When do they all come together?
Well, they are starting to converge. I think there's... Like, first, they kind of ignored Airbnb, kind of laughed at us, fought us, and now they're creating kind of very similar businesses to ours. Right. And so what's happening is, what do I think this looks like in 10 years? I think that there will be a convergence. I think that hotel companies, I think the idea of a chain hotel 10 years from now will be unrecognizable to today. I think even the big chain hotel companies, the rooms will be more personal, more local. They'll feel more like you're in a home. Because I think people ultimately, customers, have come to the conclusion, we have 600 million data points, that people love homes. That's why they live in them. Right. So what if you could just live in a home anywhere around the world when you travel? And I think what people also want, though, is that they know what they're going to get, and they can have some basic services. And so we're doing more verification. We have our community helping with us with that. We are offering more services, and hotels are trying to feel more local. And so in that way, I think you're going to see a major convergence. This idea that these two extremely separate industries, I think, is going to kind of start to blur together in the future.
What do you think, and I don't know how much of this audience knows about it, there's a company called Oyo, which is a hotel company that is on track to becoming bigger, frankly, than Marriott in 2 or 3 years
by
from now.
Room numbers.
By room numbers, backed by SoftBank and Masasan. What do you think of that company?
They're a company based out of India. They created a model where they took really low average daily room rentals, and they basically modernized the whole hotels, renovated them, put them on a technology stack, and basically are making a spread, and it's working. They brought it to China. Seems like it might be working in China as well. Now, the challenge is that these are extremely razor-thin margins. You think the margins are razor-thin in the United States for some of these businesses. Wait till you see what the margins look like in India and China. They are significantly lower. So I can't speak to the kind of financial outlook of the company. I do think that it is really, really innovative what they're doing, and I think that they're a very important player in the ultra budget price point, which is basically less than $50 a night.
Got to ask you a different question, which was it was a relatively small partnership, but you had one, I believe. I don't know if you still have it, with WeWork.
No, we never had a partnership.
You never had a partnership with WeWork.
Well, actually,
I think you did.
I think a handful of years ago, we allowed Airbnb business travelers to get access to WeWorks when they traveled. So
what do you think has happened? What do you think of what's happened to WeWork?
Wow. I think two things happened. I think the first thing that happened is what I talked about before. I think that people used to believe that every company was a tech company, and if you're a tech company, it's like a 1 or a 0. I think we now realize they're not a tech company, it's just tech companies live on a continuum. And basically the best way to understand the continuum is your gross margins, or what is your gross profit. And some things like Microsoft and these really big tech companies have really high margins, and other companies are really low margins. And I think that's the first lesson of WeWork. I think the second is just you have to be really thoughtful about the actions you have. I used to get advice from somebody who says, imagine if everything you do will be on the cover of the New York Times. Because one day it very well could be. And I think that young founders sometimes forget that they are going to one day have a huge amount of scrutiny. And I think it's also easy to underestimate the amount of responsibility we have. You know, most people never intend to have this much responsibility. You have an idea, you build something, you launch it, and then one day you have all this adulation. People say all these incredible things about you. And of course, somebody once told me, you're never as good as they say you are, and you're not as bad as they say you are. So kind of find the average between those two things. I think that we're all realizing we have a significant amount more responsibility. And I think that, you know, it's a growing up experience for a lot of founders. And, you know, we hope we can be an example and not in a good kind of example for the world.
We're going to run out of time in a minute, but why don't we hit the lights? I have a question, just one question, while we're hitting the lights, and maybe get a microphone. I know we got to get people to lunch in just a second. You put your own home up on Airbnb, make it available. Yeah. And you also still stay at Airbnbs. You might be one right now in New York.
Yeah. I've had a lot of crazy experiences.
What's the craziest Airbnb experience? Not that you should be advertising those, but.
Well, we've had all sorts of pretty weird ones. I'll give like one or two. One time I booked a woman's home and it had the novelty of having a parrot in the listing. And I thought that was really cool until I got to the listing and I realized it was a studio apartment, that she would be in the space with me, with the parrot, and that she slept on the couch, I slept in the bed, and the parrot joined me in the bed. And it wasn't really wanted, but, you know, I didn't fight it. And but we also have some really weird things. Like, you know, we get millions of customer calls every day, and we get some of the most bizarre calls. One day, a customer calls us and says they want a full refund. We say, why do you want a full refund? They said, because the house is haunted and there's a ghost in the house. And we're like, okay, well, we have to adjudicate this. So we call the host, and all the host has to do is deny it, because there's no photo evidence of ghost. Well, unfortunately, the host confirms the ghost. Says that it's a friendly ghost named Stanley, and that the ghost, Stanley, is in the listing description. We read the listing description, Stanley is mentioned. So we go back to the guest, and the guest says, yes, we knew about Stanley, that's why we booked it, but Stanley has been harassing us all night. How do you adjudicate that? So I guess the point is, in this new economy built on trust, you can only imagine the kind of issues you deal with. There is no playbook for this stuff.
Okay, we're gonna sneak in only one question right there if we can get a microphone to you. Yep.
I'm Leila. I've come to attend this from UK. I'm living in a big chain for last 4 years. And now that I come here in New York, and they said there's mandatory charge for $20 for the bar and $10 for some other kitchen. I said, I don't drink. They said, well, it is now the new trend. Are you going to start this also? Because I'm going to shift on Airbnb because of this. Not that it's $20, but it's just that I don't like the idea. Why are you forcing me to pay those $30 every day?
No, we won't do that. Hotels and airlines kind of realized the business model where if you basically add on certain fees at the end, they basically are pure profit that goes to the bottom line. And so that's obviously why when you book an airline, you'll pay for an extra baggage and hotels. So, but no, we aren't going to do that. I think one of the big powers is to try to flatten the cost model.
Okay. Please join me. You know what? I see a question right there. Let's go to it. We're going to sneak one more in, because I know everybody's got to get to lunch, and I know we have so many fabulous groundbreakers here.
Thanks a lot. I'm Sylvie. You answered my first question about the fact that you book your own home. My second question is, why made you decide to go in the policy of buying hotels?
Buying hotels?
You said that you bought
He hasn't
hotel.
bought hotels. He's bought a company called Hotel Tonight, which is effectively a platform to book hotels.
I can answer why we bought Hotel Tonight, if that's the question. So, well, it's a funny story because when we launched Airbnb, actually the original name was, and I'll try to say this quickly, Air Bed and Breakfast. The short version was, it was 2007, and I was totally broke, living with my roommate in San Francisco. We couldn't afford to pay rent. There was a design conference coming to San Francisco. All the hotels were sold out. And we had this idea, let's create a bed and breakfast for a design conference. I didn't have any beds, but Joe had 3 air beds. We inflated them. We called it airbedandbreakfast.com. Our original tagline was Air Bed and Breakfast, a cheap, affordable alternative to a hotel. And we never, ever imagined we would ever have hotels in Airbnb. And 10 years later, we were starting to realize that the number, with people go to Airbnb and they abandon Airbnb and they go to another website, the websites they were going to were hotels. And that there were a whole bunch of people that will only book Airbnbs. But there's a bunch of other people that will sometimes book Airbnbs with their family and friends, but if they're in business travel, they'll book a hotel. We thought it was just completely crazy to make you go to a different website when we already have the customer. But we didn't want to add a bunch of chain hotels. But I knew Sam Shank, the founder of Hotel Tonight. He was very consistent with our methodology, focused on boutique hotels, small business owners, which are very similar to many of our hosts. And so we thought this is an incredible partnership, and that's why we did it.
Okay. Brian Chesky, everybody, please join me in thanking him.
Thank you.
We're going to break for lunch. We will be back here with the Kardashians.